Deathworlders to the Extreme by Aquastar Dark. Chapter 6. Kaboom! Hitoshi's eyes shot open at the sound of an explosion, his mind disorientated between the piercing sound and the bitter cold. His face and body stung with the sunburn that only felt soothed from the neck down. He wasn't sure where he was at first. His mind was shrieking at him in 100 voices, and he couldn't understand a single one. But as he took note of the frigid water that engulfed him up to his throat, he realized that he'd fallen asleep after taking a swim in the lake. I slept here until dark, he realized, horror lacing his mind as he noticed the navy expanse above. Fortunately, it seemed that the night on the planet was entirely pitch black, so he could make out at least the faint shadowy outlines of the lake and rocks and the multiple items he left laying around. Though that note became irrelevant when he noticed a thick trail of black drifting into the sky a few kilometers from the lake. Smoke? Stumbling one-legged, Hitoshi brushed his hands against the rock for the faint outline of his clothes and haphazardly got dressed in the dark. The smoke still rose in the distance, and Hitoshi could faintly make out the light of sparks illuminating the blackened smoke, which, upon further examination, seemed to be partially made of dust. Did some of the ground collapse, or a volcanic eruption, maybe? Volcanic eruption, maybe? Hitoshi wondered as he pulled his jacket from the backpack and shrugged it on to guard against his finger frosting cold. Hitoshi hopped over to where her staff leaned against the rock and wrinkled his nose up the scent of rotting fish. Wait, no! I left the fish in the sun all day. There's no way I can eat it now. Bad, Hitoshi. You know better than to waste food. Hitoshi allowed himself a moment to mourn the loss of his future meal before turning back to the rising smoke, of which was now easier to see with the bright orange sparks that swirled around the base of its mass. That could start a forest fire. Sorry. Embers lighting the dry vegetation with crackling fire and lighting the surrounding trees in a blaze that would jump from one pillar of the wood to the next, burning until it reached Hitoshi's pod, and Hitoshi emptied his backpack of its wares, a sharp rock and the leftover piece of fruit warped in leaves, and pocketed them into his jacket. The rock created an unpleasant bulge that poked up Hitoshi's his stomach, and he couldn't help but worry that the fruit would fall out of its leaves and soak his jacket in its juice. Yuck! Backpack empty, Hitoshi swung into the lake and scooped up half a nut of water for this mission. Check out the source of smoke and put out any embers or fires before they got out of control. Unfortunately, he couldn't risk taking more water in fear of it leaking out through the holes he made for the straps of the backpack and soaking his jacket. Hitoshi shivered as a biting snap of wind chilled his wet skin and internally cursed himself for being so stupid as to fall asleep until night. The one time on this planet that gave him chills, even when he was sleeping in the pod. Ugh, at least it'll be warm where those fires are. Hitoshi glanced back at the fish where it lay perched on its blood-soaked rock, and after a moment of consideration, rounded back to retrieve it. Although it wasn't really edible to him now, it could still potentially be used as bait for any other potential meals. Something that wouldn't happen if a scavenger, because what planet wouldn't have scavengers to consume the rotting stuff, happened to come across and eat it before then. The fish was dry on one side and moist on the other, where he gripped it by the tail, and Toshi grimaced the countering textures that cracked and squished against his skin. I could put it in the water, he considered. Nah, I might have some left over to drink or cook with, and I'd rather not puke again from whatever bacteria managed to grow on the fish during my nap. And so Itoshi began his impromptu trek, determination burning in his eyes as he strode off on his mission, staff staff supporting his body and scratching his path and the fish dangling from its hand. Swinging, he stumbled through the dark towards the source of the explosion, and it was after a few collisions with rocks and such that he resolved to keep his staff far in front so it wouldn't hit anything in its path before crashing into them. Fortunately, it wasn't too dark he couldn't make his way, but it certainly was so that it was a struggle. I wonder why isn't it dark as Earth? Are the stars closer, maybe? He mused as he went past the towering trees, and some of the shrubbery seemed to glow in the darkness. Bioluminescence? Well, whatever it is, I'm sure it makes night travel so much less of a pain. The water sloshed heavily on his back, and warmed Totoshi's frozen body with the effort of lugging it through the undergrowth. He had a while to walk, he knew that, but even if he could make sure the smoke wasn't anything he had to worry about, then he would be satisfied. It certainly was something to do after sleeping the day away, at least. He didn't feel too worried about returning to the pod. He'd made a trail to get from the pod to the lake, and he was making one now to guide his way, and it hadn't rained since he'd crashed into the planet, so it was unlikely the path would be washed away by water. In a weird way, he felt oddly content. Probably the result of lack of sleep deprivation, huh? Weird. Amazing how the human mind could be alright with a vaguely familiar activity, even a completely alien setting. Slowly but surely, Hitoshi made his way uphill towards the smoke, which appeared to grow smaller even as he approached closer. A good sign that nothing had caught fire. Yet. Still, a sense of dread dotted his thoughts, and as he passed the winding stream, he couldn't help but glance this way and that. Hitoshi shuddered at the feeling. He'd felt the same one time when he'd been stalked by one of his parents' rivals one evening while living in Tokyo. It'd been in dark streets illuminated by streetlights that the incident occurred. And had been something Hitoshi could... Why? And... Oh my god. He had felt the same one time when he'd been stalked by one of his parents' rivals one evening while living in Tokyo. It'd been in dark streets illuminated by streetlights that the incident occurred, and had been something Hitoshi hadn't been able to report. A situation not entirely dissimilar to one he is in now. Hitoshi gripped his staff, ankling so he could fight with the spear end if he were attacked. By what? He hadn't even seen any of the predatory or even more dangerous kinds of creatures on this planet yet. I don't know what to expect to find. I don't even know what to expect to find. Hitoshi tried to take a deep breath as he quickened his pace towards the smoke. Any fire would scare up potential predators, and tried to still his beating heart to no avail. His ankle twinged an uncomfortable reminder that any fight Hitoshi would be in would most likely end his death. Damn it! Hitoshi froze as a faint breeze tousled his hair and ran through the bushes and leaves, revealing a glowing pair of yellow eyes staring at him from the undergrowth. Shota cursed as he wrestled one paw with the straps of his seat as he tried to unbuckle himself. He hadn't expected to be crash land, much less known about it until it was too late, and he was already being tugged at the planet's gravity and his ship's previous speed attributing to the crash landing. His arms screamed at him for putting it through such stress without having Recovery Girl around to heal it near instantly with her species nurturing abilities, and Shota was half tempted to use one of the venom darts to knock himself out. Not that it would do much other than kill him. Hold on. While drifting through space after waking up from his blackout, he had decided to read through some of the reports to pass the time and distract his mind from the agony, only to discover when reading through some of the more hidden details that the darts to harmlessly knock out the Deathworlder had more than enough venom concentrated in it to not only kill it being immune to it like Shota, but for the body to leak the leftover venom for any unwitting creature to die from. Shota yelped as the ship tilted on its side, crashing his broken arm between his body and seat and sending embers into the dark sky outside his ship's window. The fresh, fiery agony through his veins made him whimper, and a deep purr of pain began to erupt from his throat. Shota grimaced with narrowed eyes. I get injured so rarely and have such good access to quick healing, I never considered my pain tolerance. Though he was often rather logical, the concept that he should work on improving his pain tolerance never really occurred to Shota. Something he now deeply regretted as he abandoned his task in favor of curling up against the searing pain in through his limb. Shota desperately eyed the venom dart through the agony, and for a moment he considered using it. But no. He had to try no matter how appealing it might seem. Shota tucked his head into the seat with a whine. Maybe if I fall asleep it'll feel better. It was wishful thinking at best as Shota stared at the floor in dazed agony. Embers blooming and disappearing amongst the dusk outside his lost ship on an alien planet. Okay, that was the end of chapter 6. Next we have chapter 7. And the chapter name is Discovery. Summary. Toshi encounters his first predator and the journey continues. Hitoshi stared, frozen, at the gleaming yellow eyes of the great alien. Its dark form lay crouched cat-like between a pair of bushes, and although Hitoshi couldn't quite make out its form, it looked as though its body was armored by some sort of plating, like that on a beetle or a wood bug. Twin, fleshy appendages extended from where its whiskers might have been if it was an earth cat, and drifted aimlessly above its head like snakes, and the flat face of the alien itself was featureless with the exception of its eyes, fleshed whiskers, and plating. Hitoshi couldn't see a mouth or nose anywhere on his head. Hitoshi couldn't breathe. It was the size of a freaking leopard, and it was staring at him. I should have used the rock for my spearhead, cried out one part of Hitoshi's mind. Well, it looks like I'll get to touch another cat before my death, said the other part of his mind, despite the alien lacking any particular cat-like features. Should I back up? Maintain eye contact? Wait, no. Isn't eye contact a sign of aggression? Would that have been a good thing in this situation? Hitoshi wasn't sure what to do, so the alien decided to take up that responsibility. It rose from its haunches and swaggered from the bushes, revealing a definitely cat-like body as its armor shuffled lightly like leaves in the breeze as it circled Hitoshi and eyed him with a tilted head. Armor plating shifting this way and that, it circled him once, twice, and then a third time before abruptly stilling. Numbness spread from Hitoshi's fingers from how tightly he gripped his spear, and the tightness in his chest felt like chain wounds around his lungs. He didn't bother to force himself to breathe. How could he expect himself to be able to breathe in this kind of situation? He was going to get killed by an alien that resembled his favorite animal. A few moments passed before the animal did nothing but stare. As another breeze of wind fluttered through the trees, the cat sat down. The cat blinked a couple times as Toshi stared at it before it turned its gaze away and began to nose at some sort of plating on its foreleg for a moment. And Toshi relaxed. Maybe it's not interested in me? It was just a hopeful thought occurred to Toshi. It was just as the hopeful thought occurred to Toshi that the cat rose again to its full height before directly approaching Toshi. A pair of fleshy whiskers snuffling forward. Are those its noses? The two appendages extended forward, brushing past Hitoshi's spear and hovering over his jacket, tickling it with little hairs. Hitoshi blinked, staring at them for a moment before redirecting his stare to the cat itself, which stared back with a tilted head. It blinked. Toshi blinked back, his grip on the staff loosening as the nose whiskers trailed their way down his arm into the fish he carried in the other hand. I forgot I was holding that, thought Hitoshi. Wait, maybe. Experimentally, Hitoshi lifted the fish and gently swung it back and forth to find the cat following the fish with its eyes, head, and nose whiskers. Please work, please work, please work. The fish flipped in the air as Hitoshi tossed it, and suddenly the cat moved to intercept it. Its head split apart as it leapt forward, revealing hundreds of needle-point fangs that enveloped the fish with a menacing crunch. A crunch that made Hitoshi wince as he held tighter his spear. One of the fish's tails went to stick straight from the force before falling limp, and the cat tilted back its head and swallowed its meal whole. The cat retracted its nose whiskers and wiped at the edges of where its head had split open to form a mouth before its yellow eyes turned to train themselves on Hitoshi, whose breathing stilled again. It was already so close, and when it took 2 steps forward, it was only a foot from Hitoshi's staff, which he gripped desperately in case his plans were to go awry. A feat that only succeeded in draining what little feeling he had left in his hands between his grip and in the night's cold. The shifting of the cat's armor had Hitoshi stiffening as it approached so close that it could rip its head off. It could rip his head off if it so pleased. Its nose whiskers sniffing his jacket again, and fear sparking through his chest. Hitoshi stepped back, blinked again, and stared at him. Hitoshi stared back with his spear held close to his chest. His chest, which still had a beating heart. The standoff lasted for what must have been a minute before, with a flick of its head, the cat turned from Hitoshi and darted into the trees. It vanished in an instant. Hitoshi fell to his knees, and water sloshed into the back of his jacket. His ankles stung with the effort, though he couldn't care less. His heart was a drum in his ears, and his fingers as numb as the staff tumbled from his fingers. As he held his hand close to his chest, Hitoshi gasped deep, desperate breath that barely seemed to capture any of the rich night air that fueled his desperate lungs. He was cold, and so afraid after such an incident, and yet Hitoshi glanced in the direction he'd been walking, took note of the fading smoke. I was on a mission, wasn't I? I should at least see it through. His shuddering breath argued against his decision, but but he'd often force himself through these situations before, right? Not like this, never like this. He would see this through. I can see this through. I will do this. Gravity was as merciless as Hitoshi rose from the dark floor and gazed in the direction of the smoke and whatever had caused it, but with determination in his eyes, Hitoshi continued again his journey with his staff as his cane. It was harder now than before. After the incident with the giant cat, Hitoshi couldn't help the paranoia that flooded his veins and influenced his every move as he paused to listen to the gust of wind and glance at the dark corners. But he made his way, anxiety or not, without realizing it, until he soon found himself examining what he could of the high elevation flora in the dark pointed sticks that were short and thin. A tall plant with a bushy top that seemed to be particularly in the line of the darkness, sprawling vines with a miniature pod-shaped growth on the forest floor. Small, tear-shaped roots that hang down from the taller branches of a thick tree that grasped at the sky. Curly thorn grasses. There were so many. He found that they were different from when he was around his pod. There was like 0 periods there. It helped to distract himself, and soon after, who knows many hours since he left the lake, Hitoshi found himself standing just under the remains of the smoke. The dust had long since settled, and Hitoshi could hardly believe his ears as he stared at the massacred remains of some sort of Spaceship, satellite, escape pod? Hitoshi's heart leapt to his throat as he stared at the broken hunk of metal. Was there somebody inside that thing? Could anyone have even survived? He didn't know. The thing was a mangled mess of a half-melted metallic black parts that sprouted from an oval torso that might have once had pointed ends. Though Hitoshi wasn't entirely sure, since one side was crushed like a soda can in a blender. The damage was terrible. Hitoshi could tell that much even in the dark. And if somebody happened to be in there, hopefully the thing was built to collapse around its passenger. Why should you even care? Why should you even care? Said a spiteful piece of Hitoshi's mind. The one that cried at the injustice of when an authority refused Hitoshi help and remained cautious even after. You were kidnapped by aliens. You even killed some, I bet. You don't deserve mercy. That was literally one kind of alien. Maybe there's more that aren't kidnappers and visectors, replied the admittedly rather naive part of Hitoshi's brain. The one that encouraged him to keep trying even when things were falling apart around him. That doesn't matter. Good or bad, that isn't ours to decide. We just have to do the right thing. That's all. Hitoshi nudged a stray piece of metal with his staff and sending it tumbling aside and crashed loudly into other rocks and metal shards. Hitoshi shuddered at the loud noise for a moment before slowly approaching the wreckage with the hesitant, calculated steps that dodged metal and smoking flora. The hull of the wreckage wasn't particularly temperate as Hitoshi hovered a hand over the metal, so he gave it a gentle shove. It felt not particularly dissimilar from the outside of his pod. Hitoshi leaned against a hunk of metal shaped vaguely like a wing. It was half connected to the ship, half leaning on the ground, before leaning back with a short gasp as it slid from his hand. He stumbled back as the metal slid with a menacing shriek, and he fell into the ground with a mighty crash. Blood rushed through Hitoshi's ears as he stepped back from the wreckage, instead opting to take his investigation where it was safe to do so and out of the way of anything that might kill him, like debris. Still, he could hardly see a thing amongst the darkness, particularly considering the metal of the wreckage was black, yet he saw something faint. Light? There's a little green light. The area with the lights was damaged, but there wasn't any hanging debris for him to worry about, so he approached it and gently tapped the light with his forefinger. Hitoshi glanced at the area around the light to help with the investigation to no avail. Maybe there's still some embers I could use to make a torch? Unfortunately, the embers had all but disappeared, leaving behind nothing but debris and spotted patches of vanishing smoke around the wreckage. So Hitoshi couldn't make a torch to help his search. To make up for the lack of light, Hitoshi traced his hand along the metal, avoiding sharp edges and rubbing at any unusual grooves. Grooves that usually were a result of the extensive damage, but it was at one such groove that Hitoshi discovered a space in between panels. Unlike the cracks before, the edges were smooth, like Hitoshi gasped, like the edges of a hatch. Hitoshi felt along the grooves of which extended to be just as, if not larger than that on its pod, and bit down a school of delight at the idea that maybe he wasn't the only sentient being on this planet. He was lonely, okay? He couldn't find any buttons to open the door, so instead he opted for the next best option, forcing open the door with his bare hands. Unsurprisingly, that didn't work. Surprisingly, it prompted something else to occur. Lights brighter than the small ones he discovered earlier flashed on, bathing the surrounding forest and wreckage in light. Hitoshi squeezed his eyes against the sharp light and pressed his face against the metal in an attempt to block it out. Suddenly, the lights cut out again, and left Hitoshi blinking against the darkness as he tried to regain his sight. His sight, which was massively reduced thanks to the light canceling any dark vision he might have gained during his trek. A loud thump within the wreckage alerted Hitoshi to something moving just before a small rectangle on the hatchling went transparent, revealing a large, red-eyed, cat-like face. That's the end of chapter 7. Notes from me, the podfic, instead of like the person. The notes from the actual person writing it was just like finally done. So my notes are going to be, I'm so sorry for the stuttering in the earlier parts. It became a little less obvious later on, but I also the 2 weeks notice, sorry about that. I had some stuff going on, things got hectic, I had a lot of missing work. Everything in general was chaotic, to say the least. Health concerns, stuff like that. And my voice just forgot how to speak for long periods of time or speak aloud reading. So my speech impediment came back. Woo. That's just great. Well, it's always still there. It became a lot more obvious than usual, if you know what I mean. So yeah, that's basically it. I'm gonna try to record the next chapter, but if it turns out like horrible, I'll wait till tomorrow. Cause yeah, I don't want it to sound horrible from overuse of voice, like how just you looked like, sounded like. Why am I, bro? Speaking is hard right now. Bye.